Okay, so one of the first things that we want to look at when we're talking about DNA is just something to kind of spark some interest. And I asked the question, what percent of DNA do you think you share with these organisms? And the organisms that we're looking at here are other human beings. And so the percent that you share with other human beings is actually, it's actually 99.9% with other human beings. Okay, so with anybody else, the person sitting next to you, it's 99.9% of the DNA you share between the two of you. If we look at another organism, a chimpanzee, it's one of those ones that everybody always says that we share so much percent of our DNA with, and we actually share 98.8% of our DNA with chimpanzees. Okay, we look at another organism, a little bit further away probably. So we go to a gorilla. And with a gorilla, we're talking about sharing 98.4% of our DNA with them. Okay, so 98.4% of a gorilla's DNA is the same as our DNA. Now we look at an orangutan. Okay, and an orangutan are even a little bit more different from us. So now we're talking about 90% the same between us and an orangutan. And the last organism that we're going to look at today is a banana. And it's really interesting how much percent that we share with a banana. When I first saw this, I would have said maybe 5, 6, 7%. That's incorrect. The answer is actually 50%. You share 50% of your DNA with a banana. So if you were to take the DNA out of a banana and the DNA out of one of your cells and compared them, 50% of them would be exactly the same. All right? And so when we talk about DNA, first of all, we got to talk about the relationship between genes, chromosomes, and DNA. We've talked about genes, we've talked about chromosomes, and now we talk about DNA. And I think this picture does a really good job of explaining it. Okay? This picture over here, okay? This one that I'm talking about right in here. That's a really good picture to show this. Okay, so we've got our DNA, which if we string a bunch of DNA together, that gives us a gene. And if we string a bunch of genes together, those genes wrap up to give us a chromosome. Okay, a very good description there. What does DNA stand for? DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And DNA is the material that determines your inherited characteristic. Okay, so we go back to our genes and what we've been talking about lately. We know that DNA is what actually determines our characteristics. Okay, so the reason you have brown hair is because of your DNA. And DNA is actually made up of subunits called nucleotides. Okay, what is a nucleotide? Well, a nucleotide consists of a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. Okay, and we have 4 types of nitrogen bases that determine the type of nucleotide. So we have adenine, we have thymine, we have guanine, and cytosine. Okay, what is the difference between each of these nucleotides? Well, they all have different structures. They're different shapes. Shape is the difference. What's the best way to describe a shape of a DNA? It's a twisted ladder. which is also known as what you guys should know at this point as a double helix. Okay, so the two sides of the ladder, and you can see this in our picture down below, the two sides of the ladder are made up of the sugar and the phosphate group. Okay, that's why down here we have the sugar and the phosphate backbone. Alternating sugar and phosphate. And the rugs of the ladder are made up of pairs of bases. Okay, and adenine always pairs with thymine, and guanine always pairs with cytosine. Okay, this is going to be real quick. We're going to show you how to label this stuff. So our sugar is going to be black. So we're going to make sure anywhere that we have sugar labeled by the S here, that gets labeled black. Okay, so all of these are all sugar. Okay, anything that is a phosphate, that gets colored in as red. So anything in the middle between the sugars, and that's our phosphate sugar backbone. Remember, we just kind of talked about that. Adenine gets the color orange. Okay, do we see any other adenines? Yes, down here. Okay, thymine gets the color green. One more. Remember, adenine and thymine always go together. Guanine is going to get yellow. So our G gets yellow, and then our C is going to get blue. Okay? Nucleotide, a DNA subunit composed of sugar, phosphate, and base, nitrogen base. We've already gone over that. Okay? This is the lab we'll do in class. And you're just going to model your DNA using some candy, but we're going to skip ahead right now. Okay? So the DNA function is that DNA directs every cell in your body on how and when to make proteins for its activities and functions. So what it does, whatever a cell does, DNA determines that. Genes are sections of DNA that code for a defined function like producing certain proteins. So sections of DNA, genes code for certain proteins. And because you have millions or billions of different types of nitrogen bases arranged in different order, you get a number of different combinations, and that is almost endless. Okay, so the number of different combinations of adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine that you can come up with is almost endless. A little bit of practice here. So if we have an A, it gets a T. Remember, adenine and thymine always match up. G, C, A, G, C, C. Okay, I'll let you fill out the rest. The next part here is we start to talk about how we're going to... Ooh, I skipped a part. Okay. The order of the bases. Okay, the order of the bases. Okay, that's what we're talking about with the A, T, C, or the G, C, T, determines the number or how many and type of protein that is produced. The different genes produce different proteins. And what do proteins do? Proteins control the cell. Okay, and the reason I have these two pictures is I have Michael Simon, who's a very famous chef, and he follows recipes. And he follows those recipes in order because that order gives him a certain result. Just like we always follow the DNA in a certain order because it gives us certain proteins. So it's just like following a recipe. And I chose to use Pinocchio over here to recognize that we are talking about proteins controlling the cell. So whoever is up here controlling Pinocchio with the marionette, whoever is up there, that is the protein, and Pinocchio would be the cell. All right, last little bit here. Before copying or going through replication, a DNA molecule is split down the middle where the bases meet. The bases of each side of the molecule are used as a template for a new strand. As the bases on the original molecule are exposed, new nucleotides are matched to each side of the molecule, and two DNA molecules are formed. Okay? So I'm going to fill out the one side of this ladder. You guys go ahead and fill out the rest. Okay? And this one will end up going here. Okay? But step one of this is that we have this splitting here. So we have a protein, an enzyme that comes in and splits this, and we call this unzipping. It's almost like a zipper, where you have this protein or this molecule that goes down the strand of DNA and it unzips it for us. Okay? And then part two would be the base matching happens. Okay, so after it splits, we have new base pairs starting to come in and match up with the split. So we have this split, now we've got new base pairs coming on in here. And then the last phase is two new strands. And what you'll see is that these two are identical. Okay? We're going to skip the bottom part of your sheet, so don't worry too much about that. But we have a real quick video. I'm not going to show it on here. It is on Blended Schools, or you can see it in class, but we're talking about DNA replication, that process that we just went through of the unzipping, the base matching to two new strands. We do that for copying DNA or DNA replication, and you know that we do that anytime we need to make a new cell. Okay, so go ahead and watch the video on Blended Schools, and then you can go ahead and work on the DNA replication worksheet. I know I went quick. I know it seems like a lot, but take your time, go back to your notes, rewatch the video, come and ask me for help.